5 in the morning. The city is still dark, but Fei Changzhong is already on the water. He carries the same kind of net he used for more than 30 years. But today, he's not going fishing. He's looking for what other people have left behind. Plastic bottles, broken rope, abandoned nets. He's also watching for signs that somebody is still fishing, even though commercial fishing here is now under a 10-year ban. He knows where to look because for more than 30 years, this river was his workplace, his address, and his inheritance. Watch his hands. They know the weight of wet rope. They know how a hole answers the current and how a wind changes the surface of the water. His grandfather fished for a living. His father did too. Fei Changzhong was the third generation of his family to make a life on the river. In the early 1990s, he left Yancheng, farther north in Jiangsu province, for Nantong, where the Yangtze broadens to its final run to the sea. His wife came with him. Their child was not yet 1. They lived on a small boat. Fei Changzhong would leave at 2:03 in the morning, work the water for 4 or 5 hours, sort the catch at dawn, and reach the market before he could rest. Fishing was uncertain, exhausting, but it built a life. It began with almost nothing. Later came a 10-ton boat, then a 60-ton vessel, big enough to be workshop, kitchen, bedroom, and family home. To an official form, it was an asset. To Fei Changzhong, it held his children's childhood, his savings, and the proof that his life on the river had worked. But he had also watched the river change. Factories and docks crowded parts of the bank. Some outfalls rained strange colors. The catch grew thinner, and floating waste gathered in the current. And the damage did not stop at the waterline. Along the industrial shore in Nantong, residents lived with dust, machinery, with chemical smells. Some were afraid to open their windows or hang bedding outside. They lived beside the country's greatest river and could barely reach it. Then, in 2017, before the national 10-year ban, the river's repair reached his own boat. Nantong began clearing unsafe live abroad boats and restoring this stretch of the shoreline. Fei Changzhong was 60. He was one of the first local fisher to sign, the first to hand over his boat, and the first to watch it dismantled. It is easy to call this a wildlife story. Fewer fish, one fishing ban, nature begins to recover. But a river is not an aquarium. The Yangtze is drinking water, food, freight, electricity, floodplain, workplace, and home. When it is damaged, the cost returns to people, in water that is harder to make safe, in a polluted shoreline, in a livelihood that can no longer last, and in risks passed to families downstream. Saving it was not a choice between fish and people. It was a choice about what kind of human life the river could support, and whether the people asked to change would be abandoned to carry the cost. The policy would be collective, the consequences would be personal, and the benefit would have to belong to everyone. Today, Fei Changzhong still carries a net, only now it moves above the surface, lifting waste outside of the water instead of fish. Same river, same hands, a different bargain. Look at the Yangtze from orbit, and it can seem like a line across a map. Look at the lives around it, and the line becomes a system. China calls the 11 provincial-level regions linked by the river the Yangtze Economic Belt. It covers about a fifth of the country's land, but is home to nearly half of its people, and generates roughly half of its economic output. It runs through Chongqing, Wuhan, and Shanghai, and through thousands of smaller communities tied to the same water. The Yangtze is a living thread connecting much of that system. Its water feeds city taps and irrigates fields. Its channel carries grain, cars, coal, and containers. Wetlands along its basin can hold water in heavy rain, slow erosion, trap pollutants, and shelter the life that keeps the food web functioning. None of these services arrives with a ticket or an invoice. That is why they're easy to take for granted and painfully expensive to replace once they're gone. A working river is infrastructure, just as surely as a bridge or railway. The difference is that it is alive. For decades, development beside the Yangtze created jobs and lifted incomes. It also concentrated risk along the same banks. Industrial wastewater, untreated sewage, shipping, sand mining, altered flows, and hard concrete shorelines pressed on the river together. In places like Nantong, the contradiction was visible. Factories paid wages, but dust entered homes. Ports moved goods, but fences and pollution cut residents off from the water. China did not need to repair the Yangtze only because fish were disappearing. It needed to act because a public system was being used as if its capacity were endless. Fish matter, not as a separate cause, but as one of the river's vital signs. The Baiji, a river dolphin found nowhere else, offered the starkest warning. Around 400 were estimated in 1980. A 6-week expedition in 2006 searched its known range and found none. When a river loses an animal that lived there for millions of years, it is telling us that the whole relationship has broken. The central difficulty was not diagnosis, it was acting at the scale of the river itself. A cleanup in one city could be undone upstream. A wetland restored in one province could still be starved of water. A fish protected in one reserve could be caught beyond its boundary. In 2016, a new national principle began to organize that work: protect the river together, instead of treating every bank as space for the next development project. That meant sewage treatment and drinking water protection, mapping and regulating outfalls, relocating or closing polluting factories, restoring wetlands and natural banks. And from 2021, China's first national law written for the protection of a single river basin. The fishing ban was one piece of that larger repair. Seasonal closures had existed for years, but a few protected months could be erased after fishing resumed. In 2017, the Chishui River became an early 10-year pilot. In January 2020, commercial fishing stopped in 332 aquatic reserves across the basin. Then, on the first day of 2021, the main stem, the Great Connected Lakes and major tributaries entered a 10-year commercial fishing ban, long enough for several generations of fish to reproduce. The administrative scale was extraordinary. 111,000 registered boats and 231,000 fishers were brought out of the trade. But those numbers make the decision sound tidier than it was. A fisher might be 50 or 60, with no formal qualification and no history of working to somebody else's clock. A boat might be worth less on paper than the life built around it. Compensation could replace an engine, it could not replace identity. Here is the bargain at the heart of the policy. One group was asked to accept an immediate, intimate loss for cleaner water and a living river that would benefit millions of strangers, including people not yet born. That bargain could only be fair if the sacrifice was seen, the burden was shared, and the people who stepped aside were given a real way forward. Fu Jilong lived near the place where Dongting Lake meets the Yangtze. By the time the ban changed his life, he was 52. He had fished for nearly 40 years. He knew how to read wind across the lake at night, move a heavy vessel through current, and decide for himself when conditions turned dangerous. On land, those abilities did not arrive with a job title. To many employers, they looked like no qualifications at all. Local authorities offered free training. Fu Jilong earned certificates to operate a 300-ton vessel, work as a deckhand, and drive a speedboat. Officials helped place him with a shipping company. On paper, it was a sensible transition from one boat to another. It failed. After a lifetime of working for himself, Fu Jilong could not settle into company rules and fixed schedules. He quit not long after starting. Policy can cancel a license with a stamp. It cannot, with the same stamp, teach a middle-aged man how to inhabit a completely different life. So he tried again, this time with oyster mushrooms, a crop local families already knew how to grow. He put in more than 80,000 yuan from his fishing compensation. A local credit cooperative lent him another 150,000. He built around 50 growing sheds. The scale was ambitious, his knowledge of the market was not. Growers struggled with the cost of substrate, packaging, and distribution. His new business lost money. The river had been uncertain, but this uncertainty spoke a language he did not yet understand. What finally made the transition work was not encouragement alone, it was infrastructure. Local authorities invested in a factory for growing substrate, a packaging plant, and a facility that turned spent material into fertilizer. A cooperative connected growers to buyers. Costs fell. Produce moved faster. The business stopped leaking money at every step. By 2023, Fujilong was cultivating 58 mu, nearly 4 hectares, or about 10 acres. His operation employed more than 30 former fishers. That is a real success. It happened because one person's effort met a public system willing to learn from a failed first plan and try again. We often describe environmental policy as a restriction. Stop fishing, close the mines, move the factory. But the restriction is only the first half of a social contract. The second half is a bridge. And bridges have to reach the particular shore where a person is actually standing. Across the basin, that bridge was assembled from ordinary parts. First came a register, each eligible fisher, boat and household. Then compensation, pension enrollment, skills courses, job introductions, small business credit, public service posts for people who still struggle to find work. Local officials were told to keep individual records and follow up, because a job accepted in March might be gone by June, and the certificate is useless if a person cannot use it. This is the unglamorous machinery beneath the grand policy. A database updated, a loan guaranteed, a phone call returned, a second attempt arranged. Some former fishers did not leave the river at all. They joined patrol teams, reported illegal gear, helped scientists, rescued wildlife, and moved rubbish. Knowledge once used to find fish became knowledge used to protect a shared waterway. A camera can see a boat. A former fisher can often tell what that boat is doing, why it is sitting at that angle, what the rope in the hand might mean, where a net could be hidden beneath apparently empty water. Public policy supplied the rule. Former fishers supplied the knowledge that made it workable on the water. 5 years into the ban, official figures said all 142,000 former fishers who were able and willing to work had moved into new employment. Around 220,000 eligible people had been enrolled in basic pension insurance. Those figures matter because they show restoration being treated as social policy, not only wildlife policy. A spreadsheet cannot tell us whether every new job is secure or every household feels whole again, but it shows that restoration was being treated as a shared social responsibility, and its success is still earned one household at a time. And what did the public receive in return? Back in Nantong, Wu Zhen can answer that. As a child, he watched ships move along the Yangtze and sometimes saw the Yangtze fineless porpoise break the surface. Then the shoreline industrialized. The plants and docks brought stable incomes. They also brought sulfur dust, cement dust, noise, and chemical smells. Oil and rubbish appeared in the water. For families nearby, development came with a daily instruction: keep the windows shut. Beginning in 2016, with large-scale work launched the following year, Nantong removed or relocated 203 scattered and polluting enterprises from the shoreline. Freight functions left the old docks, 5.5 kilometers of shoreline were repaired, water connections and vegetation returned. Across 14 square kilometers of restored land, more than 2/3 were opened free to residents and visitors. Walking routes, sports grounds, forest, and public wetland replaced fences, piles of cargo, and industrial dust. This is not nature with the people edited out. It is a riverbank becoming a public place again. Wu Zhen later described 3 stages of one lifetime. First, a beautiful place where people were poor. Then, better incomes beside a damaged environment. And finally, the possibility of having prosperity and beauty together. The change is measurable in kilometers and water quality classes. It also felt in smaller freedoms. Opening a window, drying bedding outside, taking a child to the river, running alongside the river after work, watching an old industrial shore become a common front room for the city. By 2024, the Yangtze's main stem had met China's Class 2 water standard for 5 consecutive years. That is a high national benchmark. It is the category used for the most protected zones of centralized drinking water sources, as well as habitats for rare aquatic life. The direction of the system on which hundreds of millions depend had changed. In 2026, researchers published the clearest evidence yet from monitored reaches of the Yangtze's main channel. Comparing systematic surveys from 2018 to 2023, they found that fish biomass more than doubled and species richness rose by about 13%. A 2025 survey estimated 1,426 Yangtze finless porpoises, up from 1,012 in 2017. Those numbers matter because they show a living system beginning to function again. The human payoff is bigger than the fish count. A stronger food web, cleaner water, and more natural banks make the whole ecology more resilient. They protect options for children who will inherit this river but had no voice in how it was used. A fishing ban cannot, by itself, reconnect a river divided by dams and rebuild every spawning ground. Illegal fishing has not vanished. Shipping brings noise and collision risk. Pollution, dredging, altered flows, and development still press on the habitat. The government acknowledged these gaps in 2024. Enforcement capacity remained uneven, some local enforcement had slackened, and biodiversity recovery was still slow. There's another unfinished obligation. Factories, ports, and boats do not close by magic. Workers and owners also absorb disruption. If ecological repair is genuinely for everyone, their transition cannot be treated as someone else's private problem. The work is unfinished, but the change is real. The Yangtze has been given time, and keeping it safe will require the same seriousness that began the recovery. At Nantong, the Yangtze is still the daily route of Fei Changzhong. He now leads the Silver-Haired River Defenders, a volunteer team made up largely of former fishers. They patrol more than 10 kilometers of water, lift waste from the current, and help check acoustic monitors for the Yangtze finless porpoises. By the summer of 2026, Xinhua reported that the team had removed more than 700 tons of rubbish. Fei Changzhong was never the villain of this river. He was one of the people caught inside a system that had become impossible to sustain, and then asked to help build a different one. Collective environmental policy is usually shown from the air: a vast river, a restored bank, a line on a map. On the ground, it looks like Fei Changzhong giving up a home, Fu Jilong failing at his first new job and being allowed to try again, Wu Zhan opening the window and walking beside a river that had been hidden behind industry. That is what the collective promise means here. Not pretending individual sacrifices disappear, but seeing it, sharing it, and returning the benefits as something public: cleaner water, living habitat, open land, dignified work, and a future not consumed in advance. People changed how they lived with the river. Institutions changed when the first answer failed, and the river began to answer: cleaner water, living banks, and a future with more room in it. That is a good thing for everyone.